So another part of the application, I'm sure a lot of people know, is the personal statement.
So I love personal statements. I'm like that guy that just like enjoys writing them because writing is fun. But
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the podcast. My name is Jericho. Today I'm super excited to be here with John. He is about to enter his third year at McGovern Medical School here in Houston, Texas. He's going to talk about his life in med school, so super excited to talk about that. But yeah, thanks, John, for coming on the show.
yeah, glad to be here.
Um, so a question I always like to start off these, podcast episodes with is, what made you want to enter and pursue medicine in the first place?
Yeah, so I guess so. I don't have any like family history of like physicians in my family. I don't, I'm kind of like the first doctor or going to be doctor. And so I never was really like exposed to medicine from like family members growing up. But I guess my first exposure to kind of the medical field and really what sparked my interest is I'm a triplet. So I've got two sisters that are the same age as me. And we were actually IVF babies. So like the test tube babies, that you hear about. Yeah. And I remember when I first found out about that, I was like, my sisters were kind of freaked out. I was like, that's so weird. But then, just realizing how cool it was that like my kind of existence is thanks to medical technology and innovation. And so that kind of like steered my direction into just, this is such a cool field. And then also I'm like a total nerd. Like I love learning. I love science. I love podcasts like this one. Like I just love learning new things all the time. And I think that medicine and healthcare gives you the opportunity to constantly be learning and growing just your understanding of how the way the world works. You have to understand like policy and all sorts of things. And the human body is amazing. Like as I've gone through medical school, it just, your understanding, increases every day. And it's just the best place to be. Medical school is like a really academically rigorous and rich environment. And so you're just constantly surrounded by so many people and you get to learn new things every day. So, and then of course you get to make an impact on people's lives and provide care for people when they're at their most vulnerable and just guide them through those moments. So it kind of brought together a lot of different of my interests and passions. And yeah, I'm super excited to be in medical school.
Okay, that's cool. So I wanted to dive straight into medical school. Right now, as we're recording this, is a winter break, so you're not in medical school right now, but
Mm-hmm.
you just went through MS2. What was your typical day-to-day schedule like during the semester? Just paint a picture for us.
Yeah. So I guess my day to day, it kind of looks different, like from, year to year. The way I study recently is different than I studied my first year. But I guess my average study schedule, I wake up around like 6 in the morning, usually like snooze till 6:30 or just like whatever. So try to get up by 6:30. And then around like 8-ish is whenever I kind of start doing my flashcards. I'm big into like Anki flashcards, which is like a spaced repetition tool that a lot of med students use. And so I will start my Anki flashcards and try to get through that by like, 10, 11 in the morning. And then I just kind of spend from that time until usually around like 4, just studying new content, reviewing some old stuff, watching lectures, using my outside resources to just kind of get everything together. And I really try to like call it quits around like 5 o'clock, just because you can continue, you can study all night. Like you always can. There's always something more to study. So you really have to be on yourself about like turning it off. And so I usually will try to stop. And of course that schedule like shifts from day to day. If I have like a preceptorship or we have a mandatory lecture, or if I'm in, different skill sessions and stuff, like that study schedule will change a little bit, but I really do try to cut off around like 5-ish.
Okay. What do you think is a common mistake people make as they transition into medical school? Maybe like MS1, they're first few weeks in medical school, just trying to find their way. What do you think is a common mistake that people make?
Yeah, so transitioning to medical school is like, it's a big transition. Like it's a big move, changing from undergrad to entering medical school. And it can be definitely overwhelming. And I think that's it makes sense. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that people try to do is to just completely shift the way that they study, like completely to try to like ditch how they've been studying in undergrad and do a completely new thing. And it's easy to kind of think you should do that because you have all sorts of influences. Like you have MS2s, 3s, 4s, you have, you know, podcasts, you have things you've looked up on the internet telling you, you know, these are what you should do to be successful in medical school. And so there's a initial idea that you have to completely change the way that you do everything to do, you know, the specific formula of how to succeed in med school. And I think that can actually hurt you more than help you. Because realistically, if you've made it to medical school, if you've been accepted and you're starting medical school, you know how to study, you know how to do well in school, and you know yourself, you know how you like to study, and that's not going to change just because you're now in a medical school. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes people make are just throwing those things away and trying to, you know, incorporate new things. I think that the way you study evolves in medical school, and it's something that you should be aware of. But I think taking it incrementally, like step by step, you know, first increasing one thing and then adding another thing a little bit later, you know, getting an exam under your belts. Like for my first, I think studying for my first like half of my semester, I did nothing different than what I did in undergrad. I just tried to keep it exactly the same way I studied in undergrad, and I did well, you know, and then I slowly changed things. So I think that that's one thing to keep in mind.
Okay. So you touched a little bit about, you know, the transitioning being kind of overwhelming and stuff. Speaking of that, what are some ways you deal with like stress and making sure that your mental health is good throughout med school? Because I would imagine that it's a lot of work sometimes. So what do you do in those kind of situations?
Yeah, stress is real. Like med school is challenging, and it's you know, there are some, you know, while we all love it, like I love medical school, but there are some days where it's really hard. And so I think having good ways to decompress. So like for example, I do yoga a few times a week. I'm big into yoga. Didn't start that to medical school, but a bunch of my med school friends and I will like go to yoga class, you know, once a week. I think working out's been really good for me. Just keeping your physical body healthy helps keep your mental, you know, your mind in check. And then, you know, I think really having that balance, kind of like what I said earlier about like, you know, shutting it down, like, you know, not going from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. every single day, because you realistically could. But I think, you know, really giving yourself boundaries and saying, you know, I know how to study, I deserve to be here. And, you know, I'm going to study from this hour to this hour, keep it like a job, and give yourself time to decompress and relax. You know, I wake up in the morning and I, you know, start by like praying or, you know, meditating or whatever works for you, right? To kind of get your head in the right space. And then taking advantage of like the resources, like every school emphasizes mental health and mental health resources, and like taking advantage of those when they're available.
Okay. So I did want to touch a little bit about like the application process as well. So do you have any general tips about the med school application? What do you think maybe got you in? Like what kind of aspects do you think they might have saw in you that got you into medical school? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'm super grateful for my undergrad like pre-health office. They honestly like kind of handheld us through the process of like everything we need to do to like be a successful applicant to get into medical school. But I think one of the biggest thing that they emphasized to me, and like if anyone takes one thing away from this podcast, you know, it should be like that, you know, you should not apply to medical school until you are ready. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is that they want to go straight from undergrad to medical school. And so they just start applying at the end of their junior year just because that's the right thing that they feel like they should do. Or they just apply because why not? And I think that you need to know that you're ready before you apply. And so I think that knowing that, you know, I have all the prereqs, knowing that I've studied for the MCAT, I've taken the MCAT, I've done well in the MCAT, knowing that I have a good application. I think that's the big thing. Because if you're not ready to apply to medical school, then you're not going to do as well in the process. And so I think sitting down with your advisor or any advisor or current medical students or anything like that, and having a realistic look at yourself and saying like, am I ready? That's like the biggest tip, I think. As far as like what got me into medical school, I think I had a like wide range of activities. Like I was involved in a lot of different things. Obviously, GPA and MCAT score are really important, but I think having ways that differentiate yourself from other applicants is super important. And so I think I did a lot of things in undergrad through like volunteering or jobs or just like being involved in things in my undergrad that kind of set me apart from other medical school applicants.
Right. Do you think they like leadership, or do they want to see someone who has a lot of a lot of volunteer work out in the community or something? Like, what do you think AdComs try to look for in applicants these days?
Yeah, so I think volunteering I think everyone should have volunteer experience on their applications. But I think one of the just most important thing is like do things you like in college, like find things you're passionate about and do it. Like because they will ask you about it. And I think if you're not passionate about doing research with your microbiome professor, like don't do that, right? But if you are super passionate about it, like do it, right? So I think it's pursuing things that you're really passionate about. Like I, wanted to study abroad. I was like very, that was a huge thing that I wanted to do in college. And so I like took a semester off, no science classes, and I spent my time in Spain and took Spanish and like traveled, and I did some volunteering while I was abroad and stuff. And I was able to I wrote a whole essay about that in my application and then like talked about it in almost every interview. So I think I also got super involved in like mentorship programs at my undergrad. I was, constantly, I feel like a small group leader for different things. And so, but it's because I love stuff like that. Like I'm super into that kind of stuff. And so I didn't do it because to make me a better med school applicant. I just did it because it was fun for me. But because I did things I was passionate about, I was able to talk about that in my application, in my interviews.
Okay. So another part of the application, I'm sure a lot of people know, is a personal statement. Some people might be starting to plan out the personal statements right now, getting ready for the application coming soon. What are some of the most important things you think people should keep in mind as they're writing their personal statements and planning it out?
Yeah. So I love personal statements. I'm like that guy that's just like enjoys writing them. And
Wow.
my pre-med friends will like send me their essays and I just enjoy editing them and reading them.
That's cool.
Because writing is fun. But I think for the personal statement, it sounds obvious, but the most important thing is making sure that it's personal. You'd be surprised how many people just write what feel just like the most generic personal statements ever. They think that I need to write just about my most medical type experiences in their personal experience or personal statement. But that's not necessarily the case. I think that for me, one of the things I did was I picked, and I this was advice given to me. I picked like 3 characteristics you want to display about yourself in your application. For me, I picked like compassionate, genuine, and inquisitive. Like I wanted those traits to be shown. And then I wrote my essay surrounding kind of those characteristics. And so if an experience that I had didn't fit within, demonstrating those qualities about myself, then I threw it out and picked something else. And so for me, it was about like picking something that really drives home who I am as a person, that differentiates me from other medical students. And I think one of the big things is if you could like scratch out your name and put someone else's name on your personal statement and it still sounds normal, like you need to rewrite, because it should be so unique and personal to you that it could only be, Jericho's or John's personal statement.
Okay. So you would say maybe stay away from like more medical kind of experiences and have something, it doesn't have to be medical at all. Like what kind of experiences should you have on your personal statement?
Yeah. So not necessarily like taking out or steering away from it, but, one of the doctors that I worked with, she was saying like, and she's worked in admissions committee. She's like, I've read so many essays that start with like, I was in the ICU and the patient was, I was listening to the heart monitor and they yelled code blue and, everyone, and that was kind of like the setting. She's like, I've read probably 50 of those like this year. And so I'm not saying you should stay away from it. I'm saying that it needs to be unique and personal to you. And so I was an emergency room scribe for 2 years. So I wrote about that experience in my personal statement, but I also wrote about, kind of what I started this conversation about, like, being an IVF baby and how that, pushed me to, looking into medicine. And I talked about an experience I had abroad, right, that had nothing to do with medicine, and an experience as a orientation leader at my university. So I think as long as you keep it, anything you do can be related to medicine, right? Literally everything you do, you can spin to a way that like pushes you towards being a better doctor, right? And so that's what you should talk about, like how the things you've done are going to make you a good doctor, not necessarily like how many medical things you've done, if that makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, there's a lot of different experiences that you mentioned. Like, what are some of the ways that you like spend it to like make it tie into medicine? I guess you just like pointing out like the aspects you were talking about, compassion and all that. I guess you just want to pick stories that are related to that.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I did. I picked my characteristics: compassion, being genuine, being inquisitive, and I thought about experiences that I've had. So for example, studying abroad, like that has nothing to do with medicine, but I talked about how engaging with a culture that was different than my own helps me learn about what it means to like genuinely engage with other people in a way that like opens my understanding beyond the bubble that I grew up in, and talking about how that's going to make me a better doctor, because in the future I know what it means that like language, for example, can open up doors and open up barriers, and just helps you recognize the value of other humans, and so on and so on, right? So I think it's about writing about how that experience is going to make you a better doctor, because literally everything you do can you can learn and grow from every experience you have, right? You don't just learn and grow from the pre-medical type experiences. You learn and grow from everything you do. So I think that picking the things that really showcase who you are as a person.
Okay, that's good to know. I do have this one last thing that I want to touch on. Interviews. Do you have any tips for doing well in interviews? How you should conduct yourself, how you should dress, whatever. Things that people should keep in mind.
So interviews are really fun. I think that's the one thing you should remember, is that like interview days are really, really fun. And I know it's been different this year because of the coronavirus pandemic, and a lot of interview days have been moved to virtual. But when they're in person, like when I interviewed, they're really fun. I think one thing to remember is that they've already, by extending you an interview offer, like they've already looked at your GPA and your MCAT scores and your experiences and determined that they're interested in getting to know more about you. So I think that, interviews are extremely nerve-wracking, and, I'm constantly comparing myself to other people or whatever. But I think just one, recognizing that you deserve to be there and they want you to be there. And also like they're trying to roll the red carpet out. They're trying to like, feed you well and like showcase their school, because they really want you to come to their school, when you get the choice. So I think that just remembering that it's supposed to be fun can take a lot of stress off of it. And I think just like knowing your application really well, they're going to ask you about your personal statement. They're going to ask you about why you want to be a doctor. They're going to ask you about your experiences in undergrad. So just knowing your application well gets you pretty far. And then there's some questions that you're always going to be asked. You're always going to be asked why you want to be a doctor. You're always going to be asked, tell me about yourself, right? So it's like probably coming up with some pretty solid answers to those questions will help you go a long way.
I guess to end things off a little bit, if you could go back a few years to when you were an undergrad, what are some things that you would tell yourself about, the pre-med journey, or just what it's like being in medical school? What do you wish you would tell yourself back in the day?
So to my younger self, I would probably say to just like chill out a little bit. I think especially as pre-meds, and it's a big process. It's a big, medical school applications is a big looming thing that's can seem kind of overwhelming. But I think for me, I would have just said, John, like chill, it's going to be okay. Um, and it shouldn't be all encompassing. Like, the path to there are a bajillion paths to get to medical school. There's no one right way to do it. So just do what you love and um, follow the things you're passionate about, even if they have nothing to do with medicine. Um, that's going to set you apart more than anything else. So just do the things you love, find the things you're passionate about, explore them, and like just chill out a little bit. But then at the same time, it's never too early to like, get some volunteer hours under your belt, to start thinking about experiences that you want to pursue, because it does require getting into medical school does require work on your part. And so I think that picking like, just starting somewhere is a good thing, and then finding experiences you love. And so, yeah, most of all, I would tell myself, just like chill out.
So another part of the application, I'm sure a lot of people know, is a personal statement.
So I love personal statements. I'm like that guy that just like enjoys writing them because writing is fun. But